that was really our pitch to FEMA is, hey, you know that when you put somebody in a trailer, it's almost like putting your life on hold, right? And if you put somebody in one of our houses, it's like you it's a home, all right? You're not in a state of arrested development, like you can actually begin healing. And so that's beneficial for certainly for disaster, relief survivors, but also what's good for the most vulnerable is kind of good for everybody, right? It's like beneficial. So affordable housing to make it feel elevated and make people feel good about that space is super important.
What if disaster housing didn't have to feel like disaster housing? Today on Buildings 2.0, we're joined by Jordan Rogove and Wayne Norbeck, architects turned founders of Live Connected and DXA Studio. They're proving that rapid, affordable homes can be beautiful and dignified. They share how their team built over 100 homes in Maui in just a few months and what it taught them about how architects can reinvent modular design for impact, why FEMA trailers shouldn't define disaster relief, and how America's maze of building codes keeps affordability out of reach. If you believe good design should scale beyond luxury housing, this episode is for you. Let's get into it. Hey everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of Buildings 2.0. Today I have two very special guests, Jordan Rogove and Wayne Norbeck. Jordan is the CEO of Live Connected as well as a co-founder of DXA Studio. Wayne is the COO of Live Connected and as well as another co-founder of DXA Studio. Jordan, Wayne, thanks for joining.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, pleasure to be here.
So guys, to start, what stood out to me was the work you guys are doing to deliver dignified, rapid disaster housing at scale. Maybe Jordan, I'll start with you, but why housing? Why disaster relief? Like how'd you start to kind of end in this kind of intersection?
Great question. It's actually been the kind of the arc of the story of Wayne and I founding DXA Studio. One of our earliest projects was providing locally sourced building material housing in Haiti. And we immediately began to see this like amazing impact that thoughtful design could have on health and well-being. And we engaged, that was the first of many projects overseas. The work then took us to Africa and we did a number of projects over there. And then maybe about 5-6 years ago, we said, hey, there are some serious issues in the United States, like our home as well, that probably could benefit from an architect's perspective. And one of those being kind of affordable housing. And we initially conceived of Live Connected to be really kind of health focused. And at first we targeted our hometown of New York City in the capacity of like a modular system that could be applied for affordable housing, multifamily housing, like the idea of converting these like abandoned commercial buildings. And this is in advance of the pandemic, which only exacerbated that problem, right? And the amount of technical complexities and challenges and kind of exceptions to codes and unions. And I mean, there was just a wall of impediments to multifamily. So we kind of pivoted and said, let's test this out as a kind of a single family or detached housing concept and see if we can generate like enough revenue and solve issues in that forum first, and then hopefully we have the resources to take on what we think would be like a 5 to 10 year project to pave the way for bringing this kind of affordable modular solution to New York City. And so that's kind of how we started, and we did some prototypes, and very, very quickly we met some great people that said, hey, this idea has legs, finding affordability through modular construction. And not just a lot of the disaster relief housing and affordable housing isn't necessarily done by architects. It's more kind of, engineers, and no shot against them. They just don't have the kind of education that we have in ergonomics and in kind of material selection and general sort of design acumen when it comes to aesthetics and other things that help elevate housing, right? And so we got a lot of interest early on and entered some RFPs and quickly started conversations with FEMA and tried to convince them that, hey, a trailer is an inhumane response for our country. Like we could do a lot better. And we finally had an opportunity to deliver that in kind of large quantity in the Maui response that I'm sure we'll talk about later. But that was kind of the arc. Is architecture can do incredible things, rather than be the architect that sits back and waits for projects to come to them. Wayne and I said we're going to aggressively pursue opportunities and kind of throw our elbows around a little bit and try to make a difference with what we do.
Yeah. For those that may not be quite aware of the nuances between prefab and modular, perhaps folks might recall what we learned in history class with like the Sears catalog homes. Like based off what's been tried in the past, Wayne, I'm curious if you have any thoughts on this. Like how should folks think about prefab, modular? I mean, these are terms that have kind of been thrown around, but what are the nuances that people should be aware of here?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what we're really trying to do is kind of like upend that, because those terms tend to have a sort of negative stigma attached to them. Where you're seeing sort of like trailer parks and that kind of thing throughout the country, and it's thought of as kind of like the lowest common denominator in terms of the quality of housing. And our mission, Jordan was mentioning about, bringing sort of, top level design to the problem. Our mission is to really create houses that are, like literally capable of winning design awards and that sort of thing, and then have a real impact on people's lives through the quality of the design. And, so we're actually thinking of modular in a very different way, which is that, traditionally it's been done as like a single volume. And we've sort of pioneered a method called the click system, where we make different components. So we'll have a bathroom as one building block. We'll have a kitchen as one building block, flat panels for walls and roof and floor and so forth. And what that allows us to do is to ship an entire house on a regular truck for much less of the cost, because we're not shipping space. So like our house, like instead of it being like 2 or 3 trucks, it can just be 1 truck, for example. And then getting out to site, because it's already pre-finished on the interior and exterior, it's able to be assembled with a telehandler or small crane, and they can go together in a matter of hours on site. And so that's a very different model. That kind of came about because we were originally thinking of, how do we improve the FEMA trailer? They have this size trailer for the FEMA offering, and we wanted to kind of match the price and do something that was much, much better in terms of the quality. So like the FEMA trailer, it was only 8.5 feet wide, 8.5 feet tall, like a flat box, basically, that people were living in for long extended periods of time. And we looked at how to make that into a 14-foot wide, 14-foot tall sort of cathedral thing situation. And it's really sort of transformative. And then the other concept with this new way of thinking of modular is that you can literally add on these components as your family grows. Like maybe you start with a 1 bedroom, and then you can add a 2nd bedroom, you can add a 3rd bedroom, you can add a whole wing. And then it can be configured in different ways so that it can be single story or double story or combined with a bridge. So that, we're just trying to really rethink the whole model so that, we can sort of stockpile these things ultimately and be able to get houses deployed quickly and affordably.
So I'd be hard pressed to find someone who's against the idea of affordable housing, right? But of course, then it begs the question then, like, so why hasn't this thing taken off? I have to imagine things like regulation. Jordan, you alluded to New York not being kind of a fertile ground for this. What are some of the big picture factors here that are keeping us from actually scaling?
Oh man, you are asking the question of questions. We kind of, when we started in this kind of naively, like, hey, we're going to do this better than everybody else. And then we quickly discovered there's like 2 really big impediments. Like modular has always been the next big thing, right? And people have been saying that for decades. So here's our takeaway, that the 2 big impediments, one is that pretty much every manufacturer out there approaches it from a volumetric perspective, meaning that they try to build the maximum size house, which by and large, 16 feet wide, tops out anything that could be transported over the highway. And then kind of every foot reduction in width means it's less expensive to transport. But still, we're talking about like upwards of $18 a mile to transport. So you're talking about thousands and thousands of dollars in transportation costs. So that savings that you get from a controlled environment like building in a factory is immediately kind of lost in transporting it. And so our solution to that was to simply, do a system that could fit on a standard flatbed, 8.5 foot wide truck, 70 feet long. We could do it in pieces and then grow it to that 14 or 16 feet width on site with like minimal construction, as Wayne said. Like our first 1-bedroom units, we were able to put together in 4 hours. So we think that we solved hurdle number one. Hurdle number two is more formidable, and that is there are over 2,000 building codes across the United States, and every one of them is very well intentioned. You take something like the IBC, like a kind of a model code, and then each kind of municipality has determined some sort of environmental or like cultural or whatever difference, and then they kind of tweak those codes. But the net result then is you cannot build anything until you have approval, because each one is independent. And, we talked about the difference between a project and a product, that essentially that code structure requires every built building to be a project. Like it does not avail, an opportunity to deliver, a house that can be used in different places. So that immediately has like gummed up the works for really well-intentioned modular manufacturers. Like they just can't keep the assembly line going because it has to go through this, review. And some municipalities can do a quick review. You can get it done in a few weeks. Others, like every project we've tried to do in California, has been over 2 years of approvals, and every client has just given up. And so that impediment, our approach to that has been kind of activism, that we have been collectively Live Connected going down to Washington, D.C. and lobbying. We've had about 50 different congressional office visits. We've provided text to make some changes that would kind of unify an exception to building code that's available through Housing and Urban Development. And that's for the kind of for the manufactured house, which was done in, I think it's 1974, there's a bill. And so we just said, hey, if you could tweak the language a little bit, you can open that avenue of manufactured housing, which is a standard building code through HUD that has reciprocity across the country. And if you can have that building code applied, Wayne mentioned, if you can build in volume and you keep the factory humming and you can build an inventory, then building a house can be a few weeks instead of a few years. And that's a big difference, both for affordable housing, because when you build in volume, obviously the cost can come down considerably. And we found that the cost of regulatory compliance and the associated delays and holding costs can oftentimes be anywhere from like 10 to 30% of the cost of any projects. You're talking about saving 30 cents on every dollar spent for housing.
Wow.
I mean, that's a great start. So there are two bills. There's one in the Senate and then one in Congress. And whenever these guys get back to work, we hope it passes. And so that second impediment we've been chipping away at, and we hope that, that makes a big difference moving forward.
Are you guys seeing any positive improvements anywhere in the U.S.? I mean, to your point, it's so fragmented here that, you hear all these bills in New York, the city of yes and all this stuff. But like, I know that there's well-intentioned, like everyone I think understands, we need to fix this sort of kind of permitting challenge. But are you guys seeing pockets that are doing it more effectively than others?
Yeah. Absolutely. Oh, go ahead, Wade.
I mean, and you mentioned like the city of yes in New York. That was a huge zoning change for us that really helped. I mean, it was a lot of different regulations, whether it be light and air or like building height and volume, and even some of the more confusing things about the zoning code were updated, and it was really beneficial in terms of how zoning could be deployed in the city and make much better use of sites for developers across the board. So that's been a big Plus, and then also the affordability sort of provisions that were baked into that as well, where you can gain extra floor area and height for affordable developments has been really strong. There's other programs as well, like the FX and so forth. But that City of Yes thing has been a big deal for a lot of our clients in New York.
I think if I could jump in, then kind of beyond New York City, there have been some like big advances. I think the ADU measures that a lot of cities have taken, LA, it's now happening in New York. The Adams administration announced kind of like a reboot of that recently, that we've been having conversations about. That's really a beautiful opportunity for people to make ends meet, to essentially add another structure on their property that can generate income and provide inexpensive housing. And it's a clever solution that benefits a lot of people. And I think a lot of municipalities are giving kind of an overarching approval to certain models that the approval process then subsequently like goes so much faster. So that kind of ingenuity is really great. And then, some of the organizations that are proponents of modular construction, I think the Modular Building Institute has a really fantastic idea. It's going to be really hard to execute, but this idea of establishing regional building codes, I mean, it makes too much sense. It's like kind of unify, 5 or 6 states that have, similar climates and similar risk factors, whether it be seismic or hurricanes or whatever, and then that applies. So then if you could kind of break the United States into like 5 or 6 of those zones, then even though you don't have an overarching federal code, you would have these sort of kind of unions between areas that would make construction so much easier and would bring the cost down. So like we love what they're doing, that fight, and I think that's kind of the future, to push that sort of common sense. I mean, I think there's great examples overseas too. I think in the Scandinavian countries, there's an overarching building code which makes it a lot easier to build. And then, the great example that the Times profiled last year in Japan, like saying yes to development, and now taxi drivers are able to afford 3-bedroom apartments in Tokyo 10 years later. So just reform that's happening. It's slow going, but I think the crisis is to a point where it's getting a lot more attention, and lawmakers are a lot more receptive to change.
Yeah. And for some, it goes far beyond, I think policy. I mean, I saw something on the internet recently about the percentage of 30-year-olds and below that are even able to kind of enter into the home market. This is particularly close to home for, I think, the younger generation, just realizing like, I have no idea how, previous generations did this, but, an entry home, being just significantly out of touch with reality. Of course, the financing around that. And yet here I am looking at, on my screen here, a beautiful product you guys have on your screen, on Live Connected. I see Connexus, the future of modular living, starting at $165,000. It seems like it's almost like too good to be true. So paint kind of the picture, like what could be possible if we started to see more of these products out there. And I'd like to think one of the things is that the price eventually starts to come down.
Yeah. So what we see is kind of a missing middle when it comes to construction. One of the things that has come up in these congressional office visits is, do the kind of like home builders association, do these other groups oppose what you're trying to do? Do they think that you're going to be taking business away? And we've had those conversations, and they do not, because they just honestly, they need to build in enough profit to make building worthwhile. And so their sales point is well beyond what we can provide. So I mean, a lot of these guys won't build anything that's less than $600,000.
Right.
And here we can build something that's less than $200,000. And even with the land acquisition, shipping, installation, all of those things, it's still a fraction of what would be the kind of baseline to attract home builders across the country. So yeah, it's really just that last regulatory hurdle to be able to do this and not have to redesign it for each town that we build in, that's it. I mean, we can't control interest rates, right? We can't control salaries, the economy, anything, but we can effectively control the approval process collectively. And that is a primary weapon for all of us to tackle affordability.
Yeah. And to add to that, I think one of the things we've been trying to do is kind of redo how the whole process works for a client. I think we were both like sort of buying cars at the time we started Live Connected, and we started to think like, it's great that you go on these car websites and you say, all right, here's the model I'd like to have. It starts at this price. We're going to configure it. We're going to pick the finishes, and there's a certain range of those types of things. And by the end of, maybe like a 10-minute process, you have a product. It tells you where to buy it. That ease of being able to purchase something like this and to have the financing available and everything right there, as opposed to the custom house design process, which is a complete mystery to most folks. We have no idea how long it's going to take. We don't know what we're going to end up with at the end of the day. The regulatory approvals certainly play into that, like Jordan was mentioning. But our thought with the website there that you brought up was have the houses right there. We have a starting price that's vetted by the manufacturing partners that we have. Then people can go in and literally configure the house. Here's a couple different options, and switch around materials, and then they have a price and they're ready to go, and we know how to get it approved. And that's where we sort of combine both the Live Connected and the DXA side of things, because on DXA side, we can do the filing and all the kind of site design that's associated with the house. But the whole thing becomes a very easy process, demystifies it, simplifies it, and just allows people to kind of engage much more quickly in being able to obtain a home.
I think you guys both alluded to it, Wayne, you with financing and Jordan, you with contractors. But a wise man once said, show me the incentives and I'll show you the outcome. I appreciate you guys are also, when presenting something new, there's a host of perhaps forces around the table that might actually be resistant to that, either for, again, something as simple as just like the profit motive of a traditional kind of builder, which is, kind of a worthy, consideration, as well as the financing side. What are some of those existing incentives that perhaps I take for granted, both of which I've never considered, in terms of how you finance something, or just like the existing kind of building industry? Are you seeing pushback from those and others?
The two pushbacks, and really they relent with the more that you explain what we're trying to do. I would identify as lenders, like banks. There's not a whole lot of imagination that happens on the other side of the telephone when you're talking to banks. so like trying to secure financing. But wait, is it modular, or is it a house? Is it attached to the ground? Wait a sec, let me check this table. It's just like, it's painful. And so, we've talked to dozens and dozens, and there's only really been 2 or 3 lenders that sort of understand the potential here, and they're completely risk averse. And so you really have to win them over. So that's one thing, but it's happening, right? It's like, I don't mean to totally trash these guys. They're a very important part of the process, but they're, again, in Wayne alluded to it earlier, there's still this stigma, like everyone's thinking double wides from the 70s and trailer parks, and it's like, no, that was one stop on this like progression and evolution of this as a possibility. The other one is, we have in earnest tried to do like joint venture development projects in several locations where we've identified, like, again, that missing middle. Like, every property for sale starts at 800,000 or 900,000, but they've got a lot of blue collar folks that are getting displaced. And we said, hey, let us buy this parcel here, and we negotiate for some land, and then we go into planning, the planning committees of these towns, and they're like, we really don't want New Yorkers coming up here and taking over and building these kind of smaller, affordable housing units. And we're like, well, I mean, you have a housing crisis. Yes, we do. Well, we're coming to solution. So there's a skepticism, right? And then it's combined with that stigma. There's resistance, but eventually you can win them over, but not before you spend like a year or 2 years with environmental reviews and things that are kind of thrown your way by people that don't want affordable housing near them. It kind of gets weaponized, right? all well intentioned, but like since I guess the late 70s, early 80s, the process towards approval has gotten so complicated in so many places, and there's so many pitfalls. And then what happens is the process, it doesn't pencil out any longer. You can't hold the land for 2 years without some sort of income coming in, so you can't finance it. And so there's this strangulation that happens even with the best intentions, right? So like those are like two impediments on the larger scale application. You have the impediments of the actual creation of the individual unit, but then it's kind of deployment or kind of installation in places that's the other like forces working against it.
And yet we've solved this in some ways before, perhaps not through modular, right? But what we learned here about Levittown and others. Um, I mean, what did we get right then that perhaps we're not getting right now?
Well, I mean, one issue that sort of started to emerge a lot with the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic is the availability of contractors, and that's
Mm.
something that we run into over and over again with all the different types of projects that we're looking at.
Yeah.
Is that when you look at the costs of framing up a house on site, it can look pretty good depending on the region that you're in, but you may have to wait an extended period of time before these builders are available. And that's where we're hoping to kind of fill a void, is that or you're in a location, like we have a project up in Vermont, for example. There's a very small window of when you can get in there and deliver the house, and you can't be framing and going through like a 4-month process. It's got to be enclosed and so forth. So what we're hoping to do here is to also be able to say that supply issue of labor can also be addressed with this type of solution, where we can get the houses in there and be a little bit more effective in terms of these schedules, because like Jordan mentioned, that holding of the land is such an important factor in terms of how these things can really pencil out.
One of the things that stands out is just how beautiful of a product you guys have delivered. Again, I'm kind of staring at your the website here, and I mean, anywhere, this is an incredible product. The design process itself. Can you talk to me a little bit about what are those pillars? Like, what's important for you guys in design? Like, what there's some thought that was placed into this in terms of perhaps not an infinite amount of design moves, but you guys have kind of carefully curated what the home should be. Can you guys talk to me a little bit about how you guys thought?
Yeah, I think with the goal of affordability and disaster relief and government opportunities, you really want to try to make this thing as efficient as possible. So if you look at other kind of modular concepts, there are a lot that are not too dissimilar in floor plan to ours, but where we really shine, I think, is when you look at it in both elevation and section, right? When you go vertical, that when you go up. So if you're limited to floor plate and amount of square footage, which is like oftentimes the metric to assess cost, we really kind of captured that, kind of extruding that upward. And so the kind of higher ceiling was really important to us. Spending like incrementally more, like maybe 5 or 10% more by adding a lot more windows than some of the other modular concepts, because natural light is like a resource available to all of us, and it can elevate the spirit. And just positioning those windows in the right way to kind of frame views at the site, but also bring light in and try to enhance this kind of the quality of luminosity and reflection of light throughout. Direct light, we really believe that is it really kind of powerful, or I'm sorry, it has quite an impact on us, like unknowingly so, maybe subconsciously, instead of having kind of down lights like you see in most construction, to not necessarily see the source or the lamp, to kind of reflect that off of other surfaces. It's much more natural and kind of calming, again, without you even knowing it. And then just general kind of material selections. We're not big fans of drywall. It's kind of like a thoughtless material. You just kind of throw it up there, and you expect whoever moves in will do something with it, hang something on it, or paint it. Like, we want to compose something a little bit more. And then, like I said, it doesn't travel well. So for modular, it doesn't make a ton of sense. Going with like really like beautiful wood veneered paneling in the form of plywood. Just detailing that properly, it becomes a very high end material and not just kind of like a ubiquitous kind of construction material. So just all these little moves that speak to kind of like the tactile, like how it feels to the touch, light quality, how it kind of makes you feel, and certainly those higher ceilings compared to 99% of the other stuff that's out there. It's just much more elevated, and I think it has a big impact on people that are living in that space. And that was really our pitch to FEMA is, hey, that when you put somebody in a trailer, it's almost like putting your life on hold, right? And if you put somebody in one of our houses, it's like it's a home, all right? You're not in a state of arrested development, like you can actually begin healing. And so that's beneficial for certainly for disaster, relief survivors, but also what's good for the most vulnerable is kind of good for everybody, right? It's like beneficial. So affordable housing, to make it feel elevated and make people feel good about that space, is super important. And I think that was the goal of all those little design moves, is to kind of elevate, and I think you alluded to it earlier in our conversation, provide a sense of dignity.
Yeah. Yeah. Talk to us about what you guys were able to achieve most recently in Hawaii, perhaps the kind of the what was happening there, as well as maybe the how. It's my understanding something upwards of 100 homes, if I got that
Yep.
right. What was happening? What was kind of the call to you guys? And then perhaps walk us through kind of the A to Z. How the heck did you guys get that to work?
Yeah. So 2023 were the wildfires in Lahaina, and it destroyed over 2,000 acres, 2,200 structures, and something like 5 billion in damage overall. But I mean, literally the entire town of Lahaina was just completely wiped out. So the project was a FEMA project in partnership with the state of Hawaii. And the first phase was 169 homes that was built on a section of state-owned land just above the village, sort of in between the village and the mountain backdrop. And so there was an RFP that was issued last year and awarded at the end of July for that first phase of 169 homes. We were awarded 109 of them, and there were two other groups that I think they were required to do 3 groups total, but we got the lion's share of the order. One of the reasons why we were selected is exactly what Jordan was just mentioning about all the sort of design principles associated with the houses, that the governor was very interested, Josh Green, in providing a sort of permanent housing solution, and not something that was going to be delivered and then taken back and so forth. So that RFP was awarded at the end of July. And then by January 15th, all 109 homes were delivered and fully occupied. The first set of houses, the first occupants moved in just before Thanksgiving. Incredible effort. We had an amazing team, and we just, it was all hands on deck, shop drawings immediately, the whole production time frame, shipping. We worked with 2 different manufacturers, one in Colorado and one in Idaho, and then shipped out from Seattle and San Diego, got the houses over there and set. And yeah, the project was a huge success.
I'm just shaking my head here just because I think you're probably understating
Yeah.
what it took there. But in that process of just kind of rapid succession of these homes, did you uncover things that perhaps maybe for the next iteration you'd think, okay, we should probably tweak this or do this, or I'm curious some of the lessons learned there.
100%. I liken the experience to my father, who's a physician, when he's on call with the emergency room or the ICU, and you just could get a call anytime, 24/7, no days off from the moment it was awarded. As Wayne said, it kind of July, it was nonstop. So it required just routine visits to the 2 manufacturers. And just want to kind of mention some of the partners in this effort because they were phenomenal. The big partner was a group called Dynamic. They are a Louisiana-based contractor that really specializes in this, and I think they started in the Louisiana area and now are spreading around. So they acted as what's called the prime contractor. We kind of internally referred to them as the government whisperers. right? Or the government speakers, because architects looking at like a 500-page government document with acronyms that no one knows, like they kind of bridge the gap and we're able to kind of put stuff together. And then as Wayne mentioned, we had manufacturers. We had a Fading West in Colorado and Gurdon in Idaho. And the thing that we learned, I think, is to have a lot of partners to be able to produce really quickly. And so that's a big part of it, is the ability to just get rolling quickly, right? Then the logistics of taking the houses there from those two locations out to Hawaii, like we had a group called Marix that was helping us with all of the trucking and logistics. They were awesome. The moment that they sent like a live drone feed of the first barge of our houses pulling out of the port of Seattle, man, that was like one of the happiest. It was like my kids being born, then that barge pulling out like right after that. Anyway, totally exciting. I think the lesson learned is, the biggest lesson I think is that there is no reason that it should take a year or 9 months or whatever it ended up being to generate an RFP, and then then go through approvals, then do the manufacturing, then ship it. That's crazy, right? So I think what we're going to try to do, and this is already happening in large part with some of the states, with FEMA having a less centralized an omniscient role in disaster relief, the states are kind of stepping up. And I think the most progressive, thoughtful, and the best model that we're seeing so far is the state of Texas. That's just like, hey, we know climate change is going to make these disasters more frequent. Why don't we streamline this? Why don't we approve certain models? And why not even have them ready to go? That takes a lot of thought, and then the lawmakers have to appropriate money for something that hasn't even happened yet. Imagine that. So I think the big lesson is there's no reason to, again, treat this as a project and do it the way you would normally build something, as opposed to just having it ready. Even if you don't build them all, if you don't want to spend the money on that, have pre-approved response ready to go, so that you can call the manufacturer the day after the disaster, and they can start banging them out. We can make the houses and deliver them. In the case of this project, the teams at Gurdon and Fading West, I mean, I think it was like between 6 and 7 weeks. 109 houses. At its peak, there were, between the companies, 4 houses coming off the assembly line each day. So if you can allow that, then those houses get there, a matter of weeks after a disaster, instead of what turned out to be about a year and a half later.
Did you get to walk inside your own product?
Oh yeah.
I love it.
Not only that, I got to build all the furniture for. I was the most expensive IKEA furniture builder the world's ever seen.
Special guys. I think everything we've talked to here in the last hour, I appreciate that we could dive in and do a podcast episode on just any one of these subjects, from the financing, mechanics, the logistics, regulations. This has been incredibly fun, and I'm incredibly excited to hopefully do a part 2. For those listening that want to follow the journey of both DXA, Live Connected, how do they find you guys? Where can they find you guys?
Yeah, best place is online. So both companies have websites. We have dxastudio.com, and then Live Connected is liv-connected.com. And there's our information, contact information, and information about what we do on the site.
Love it. Jordan, Wayne, this has been fun, and I can't wait for part 2.
Jose, thank you very much. It's been a lot of fun talking to you, and look forward to the next conversation.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much.